Okay, so I like Kubrick. You probably like Kubrick, unless you don't. And lately I've been trying to watch all of the classic films. Films in terms of classic American culture and classic film culture in general. Like when you go down the list of top recommended movies by directors, these directors say, hey, if you want to understand film, you have to watch these movies. I've been trying to check off those boxes. And there's a few things that I've realized. One, there's an infinite number of movies out there that people will rate highly and demand you watch. Everyone all the time will always be like, well, if you want to appreciate film, you have to watch this and this and this, and then study this director and then this director and this filmmaker to truly appreciate film in this time period. It's daunting. I always feel like I'm behind when it comes to knowing about a film. Every time I watch something, something new comes up and replaces it, and I feel guilty I haven't sat down to appreciate it yet. Honestly though, I love it. For my entire life, there will always be more to appreciate in an art form that I already love. And two, being a young person, I want to feel respected in an art form that I myself have a lot of respect for. Now you're probably thinking, why should you care about that? You're 20 years old. Who cares if you haven't seen every important major motion picture from the last 100 years? And you're right, I shouldn't, but I do. If someone recommends me a film and says it's a must-watch if I love the art form, I'll probably watch it. But it's for me. I'm not trying to please anyone else. I want to know everything there is to know. Every little piece of trivia and every technique and minor detail, because I want to put into words and express why a film is meaningful to me. In doing that, I think I found a common thread that checks all the boxes when it comes to what I enjoy in films. And that thread seems to be Kubrick. Every time I sit down to check off another one of his films on my list, I get excited when it's Kubrick. And I got really sad when I didn't have any more of his movies to watch. Since in 1999, right after he finished Eyes Wide Shut, he died. Now, I want to answer the big question you all might be asking. Why? Why Kubrick? It's kind of weird to say, but I admire his weird quirks when he makes movies.
Of a conversation I had with Steven Spielberg about what was the most difficult and challenging thing about directing a film. And I believe Steven summed it up about as profoundly as you can. He thought the most difficult and challenging thing about directing a film was getting out of the car. I'm sure you all know the feeling. But at the same time, anyone who has ever been privileged to direct a film also knows that although it can be like trying to write War and Peace in a bumper car in an amusement park, when you finally get it right, there are not many joys in life that can equal the feeling.
If you do any research at all, you'll find out he's very particular about every single detail. He wasn't the crazy, sociopathic recluse that the media likes to paint him as. He was just a guy who had standards and didn't like it if you messed with those standards, and I can respect that. Each of his films feel very planned out and purposeful. Every shot, every zoom, every line of dialogue adds to the film as a whole. Well, every good filmmaker does that, and you're right. But what makes Kubrick different is he was not afraid to push himself and the film as a whole to a new level. Nothing was off limits for the guy. And again, the same argument can be made. Well, doesn't every good filmmaker do that? Well, look at his catalog. Could any other filmmaker even think about making the films like Lolita or Dr. Strangelove or even A Clockwork Orange? I don't think so, and definitely not today.
Then you come across certain kinds of films that when you go to the theater and when you see them, you're completely surprised. They make you look at life a different way. They make you look at being human a different way. They touch areas that you don't want touched sometimes.
Yeah.
It's provoke you, which
Right.
is good. And then there's that rarest of films where when you see it continually over years, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, you still see more in it. And what's even better is that if you're making pictures, you go back to this well, this source, for A, inspiration, and B, maybe it should be A, is to learn how to make pictures. To learn, and remember when you get tired, especially if you make 10 or 12 films in your life, and you get tired, you say, why, how can I get that better? What can I do? You look at that source, you look at that inspiration, you say, well, Kubrick wouldn't let it stay this way. Yes. He would have changed that angle, he would have worked it out, he would have tried to figure out getting more time to shoot the scene this way or that way. He would have really seen it to its end. Yeah. And for that inspiration, I must say, it's looking at his films, and there's many ways I look at his films, besides on a big screen. I like watching them on television, I like watching with the sound off.
We can talk about the films as a whole all day, but what about his style? Well, there are a few things I noticed. He never settled into a genre and never settled for a playbook of how to make each of his films. Everything he does in his films was never to boost himself or his credibility. In his mind, he has every skill that he needs. Martin Scorsese said during an interview that Kubrick never made the same film twice. And he's right, he didn't. Going down the list, it's very obvious the difference. Paths of Glory is about the pains and trials of the First World War. Lolita is the relationship between two slimy and twisted men and a young 14-year-old girl. 2001: A Space Odyssey is the absolute definition of a horrific sci-fi experience. Dr. Strangelove is a dark comedy about nuclear annihilation during the Cold War, and A Clockwork Orange is a character study in the insanity of a morally gray miner. There are many more examples with all of his films, but those are just a few. Another thing I noticed when watching his films is his use of the frame. Every frame is very detailed and populated. There are no bad shots in any of his films because every frame adds to the story. The camera almost acts as an omniscient being inside of the world he's trying to show us. This would make sense since most of his films are adaptations of books, but it's done so well you feel like you're being told a story from another person. What I mean by this is, you'll be watching a scene, for example this one from Barry Lyndon, and think, wow, this is a nice picture. Redmond Barry is asleep hunched over in his chair with a group of drunks asleep behind him, even without any context. You know that he's drunk trying to drown his feelings, but the whole story is actually even more sad. Barry is struggling with the death of his young son, and he's drinking his sorrows away. It's sad and he's grieving, but then the picture moves, and Bullingdon walks in the frame from the left. Nothing moves except for the actor, and now you feel the tension between Bullingdon and Barry, even before Barry wakes up. Another example is from the opening shot of A Clockwork Orange. You start with a close-up on Alex's face, but it pulls back to reveal the entire Korova milk bar. The frame gives you more and more information over time, but not too fast that it overloads you. Alex and the Droogs come into the frame, then the mannequins, then it shows the other weird and eccentric patrons of the bar, all to the haunting opening score, which for the record is an adaptation of Henry Purcell's March that he wrote for the death of Queen Mary II of England, who was married to William III, also known as William of Orange. That's not entirely why it's called A Clockwork Orange, but it's cool nonetheless. For number 5, I have Lolita. This film had me cringing the entire time and made me want to wash my eyes out. Now I know that's the classic movie reviewer hyperbole you hear when a film is downright terrible, but honestly I enjoyed this film a lot. My prediction is that Kubrick wanted you to feel uncomfortable throughout the film because the subject matter is so taboo. And that's the point. These two creepy dudes are sexually attracted to a young girl and you want to see them both get what's coming to them. And in a way they do. I just have to mention the absolutely creepy performance by Peter Sellers. I mean, he just nails it. Specifically his monologue on the deck outside the hotel room. It's by far my favorite scene of the whole film. For number 4, I have 2001: A Space Odyssey. This film only gets better the more I watch it. Everything is great about it, but by far the best parts are the soundtrack and the visual effects. The classical music that plays fits so well that it's even become iconic at this point. So much so that the Blue Danube, the song that was playing at the start of this video, is now just known as spacewalking music to a lot of people. The visual effects are out of this world. Also, the CGI is incredible. Oh wait, it's not CGI because this movie was made 53 years ago. Yeah, that's right. This movie came out in 1968 and it still looks amazing today. To put that in perspective, the United States hadn't even landed on the moon yet. To be perfectly honest, I'd argue it looks better than Star Wars, which came out 9 years later. I'm not even talking about the ships flying through space either. I mean, just look at the shot of Dave running through his spacecraft in the Jupiter mission part of the film. Number 3 is The Shining. There's whole essays you can write about how this is a masterpiece of a film, but I just want to say one or two things I love about it. Firstly, I think Shelley Duvall doesn't get enough credit for how good she was in this movie. It's not as good as Jack Nicholson, obviously, but you believe her performance of a barely put-together woman who was always on the edge of insanity. Maybe Kubrick didn't help her in the most moral of ways, but it turned into a great performance. Same goes for Danny Lloyd. At 6 years old, I'm not so sure I would have had the patience to be on a film set and get yelled at by a guy I barely knew through a bullhorn. Apparently, he didn't even know it was a horror film until years later, which seems odd. The other thing I loved was the Overlook Hotel itself. The whole film you're just wondering about the layout and the maze-like feel of the entire property, particularly the scenes where Danny rides around on his big wheel, turning corners as the camera's at eye level with him the whole time. The tracking shots in particular really make you notice how huge the hotel really is. Number 2 has to be Barry Lyndon. Absolutely the most beautiful film in Kubrick's catalog. It seems every landscape shot, every costume, every gust of wind adds to the absolutely beautiful scope of the film, and it just makes it feel huge when you're watching it. If there's one word I would use to describe this movie, it's cold. Because the relationships built in this film ends with one thing: getting even. Towards the beginning, his only friend in the army is shot and killed, and there's nothing Barry can even do about it. And by the end, he's just a one-legged cripple, forced to leave England for the rest of his life by his stepson. No happy ending, no finite resolution, just a broken man, both physically and emotionally. In a sentence, they're all equal now. If you've seen the film, you'll know what that means and how hard that hits. There's nothing bad about this film, and if I were to give it a rating, it would be an easy 10 out of 10. Everything about it is just beautiful to look at, and the acting is some of the best I've ever seen. So why number 2? Well, it's damn near 3 hours long. While I have no argument against that, I would much rather watch the number 1 film over this for that reason alone. You feel the length, and it doesn't fly by any means. And that's not a knock against it at all. I think that's the intended view, but wow, is it slow sometimes. It's a man's whole life over decades. So yeah, it's long, but the film is so well done, I wouldn't have it any other way. And number 1, according to me, is A Clockwork Orange. I love this film just as much as Barry Lyndon, but I love it more because of Malcolm McDowell himself. Don't get me wrong, Ryan O'Neal is great, but
Oh man! Oh God! Oh man! Oh God! Oh man! Oh God! Oh man! Oh God! Oh man!
he's not exactly the talent that Malcolm is. I absolutely love the dystopian society. It's almost backwards and post-apocalyptic. Every character seems to ooze this uncomfortable lust to take advantage of everyone else. Like you turn your back to them and they just put on this devilish smile, and then they try to plot to kill you and take your organs and sell them for profit. I know that's oddly specific, but that's just the feeling I get when I see these caricatures of people interact. Honestly, what makes this film great is not what's said, but the glances and perspective that the camera gives us throughout. I'll never forget Alex's look on his face when he hears Beethoven for the first time, or the old man looking through the keyhole when Alex is taking a bath in his house. Anyway, that was my video on Stanley Kubrick. I hope I gave you a glance on why I love his films so much. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. And if you've never heard of him before, I urge you to watch at least one of his films. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you later.